She thought it was just another housekeeping job in a wealthy mansion, nothing out of the ordinary. But when she met the millionaire's twin children, wild, uncontrollable, and feared by every nanny before her, everything changed. No one believed she could last a single day, let alone do the impossible. Stay with me right to the end, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and comment below where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's begin. Maya Williams had walked through enough marble foyers and past enough crystal chandeliers to know when she was out of her league. But bills don't pay themselves, and her mother's medical expenses weren't getting any smaller. So when the employment agency called about a housekeeping position at the Hawthorne estate, she swallowed her pride and said yes. The mansion loomed before her, like something from a magazine she could never afford to buy. Iron gates, manicured gardens, windows that probably cost more than her yearly rent. Maya adjusted her worn coat and reminded herself why she was here. This wasn't about fitting in. This was about surviving. Mrs. Keller, the head housekeeper, met her at the servants' entrance. The older woman's expression was kind but tired, the look of someone who'd seen too many hopefuls come and go. "You're the new girl," Mrs. Keller said, not unkindly. "How long do you think you'll last?" The question caught Maya off guard. "I'm sorry?" "The children," Mrs. Keller explained, leading her through corridors lined with oil paintings worth more than Maya's neighborhood. Twin boys, 5 years old. They've gone through 14 nannies in 6 months. The last one left crying and never came back for her final paycheck. Maya's stomach dropped. Children weren't mentioned in the job description. She'd been hired as a housekeeper, nothing more. "I don't understand. I'm here to clean, not watch kids." Mrs. Keller paused at the bottom of a grand staircase. "Honey, in this house, everyone watches those boys, because if you don't, someone gets hurt. And I don't just mean them." The sound hit Maya before she saw them. Screaming, not the normal crying of upset children, but something deeper, desperate, raw. It echoed down from the upper floors like a siren that never stopped. "That's been going on for 3 hours, Mrs. Keller said matter-of-factly. "Mr. Hawthorne locked himself in his study, says he can't handle it anymore." Maya followed the sound up the stairs, drawn by something she couldn't name. The crying led her to a bedroom door that stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see 2 small figures huddled in the corner of an otherwise pristine room. Toys scattered everywhere, furniture overturned, curtains torn. The boys were identical in every way except their expressions. One glared at the world with pure rage. The other stared at nothing with empty eyes. Both were covered in what looked like paint, or food, or both. "Ethan and Eli," Mrs. Keller whispered behind her. "Their mother died in a car accident 8 months ago. They haven't been the same since." Maya felt something twist in her chest. She recognized that look, the same hollow stare she'd worn after her father left, after the foster homes, after every time life reminded her she was disposable. What happened to the nannies? Bit, kicked, scratched. One had her hair pulled out in chunks. Another was pushed down the stairs. The last one found her car keyed in the driveway. Mrs. Keller shook her head. "These aren't normal children anymore. They're broken." The word hit Maya like a slap. Broken. How many times had she heard that word used to describe kids like her? Kids who acted out because they hurt too much to know how else to express it. Where's their father now? Drinking in his study, most likely. Edward Hawthorne built a fortune in real estate, but he can't figure out how to handle 2 grieving children. So he hires strangers and hopes someone else can fix what he can't. Maya watched the boys through the crack in the door. They'd stopped screaming, but the silence somehow felt worse. It was the quiet of children who'd given up believing anyone would come. She thought about leaving, walking back down those marble stairs, past those expensive paintings, out those iron gates and back to her small apartment where at least the problems were familiar. But something held her there. Maybe it was the way the smaller boy clutched a threadbare stuffed animal like it was his only friend in the world. Maybe it was how the other one sat protectively in front of his brother, ready to fight anyone who came too close. Or maybe it was the memory of her own childhood, when she would have given anything for one adult to look at her and see possibility instead of problems. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" Maya asked. Mrs. Keller gave her a look that held both sympathy and warning. Keep them alive. Keep the house standing. And try not to take anything they do personally. They've been hurt by every adult in their lives. They're not going to trust you just because you're new. The next few hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Maya learned that Ethan, the angrier twin, had a gift for finding every sharp object in a room. Eli, the quieter one, could disappear faster than smoke and reappear in the most dangerous places possible. By lunchtime, Maya had pulled Eli down from a second-story window ledge, wrestled a kitchen knife away from Ethan, and cleaned maple syrup off surfaces she didn't know syrup could reach. Her clothes were stained, her hair was a mess, and she was pretty sure she had bite marks on her arm. But she was still there. "You're bleeding," Mrs. Keller observed when Maya stumbled into the kitchen. Maya looked down at the scratches on her hands. "I've had worse. Most people would have quit by now. Most people haven't been where I've been." As the afternoon wore on, Maya began to notice patterns. Ethan's outbursts always came right before his brother did something self-destructive. Eli's disappearing acts happened when things got too loud or too overwhelming. They weren't just acting out randomly. They were protecting each other the only way they knew how. When dinner time approached, Maya made a decision that went against everything Mrs. Keller had told her. Instead of trying to force the boys to come to the dining room, she brought dinner to them. She sat on the floor of their destroyed bedroom with 2 plates of chicken nuggets and fruit, saying nothing. Ethan immediately knocked over his plate, sending nuggets flying across the room. But Eli, after watching his brother's defiance, quietly reached for a piece of apple. It was the first time all day that either child had accepted anything from an adult. Maya didn't celebrate. She didn't make a big deal of it. She just sat there, eating her own dinner on the floor of a millionaire's mansion, surrounded by chaos and the smell of paint and syrup, feeling more at home than she had in years. Because sometimes the most impossible thing isn't taming wild children or impressing wealthy employers. Sometimes it's simply deciding to stay when everyone else has already given up. That night, Maya barely slept. The cramped studio apartment felt smaller than usual after spending a day in rooms with 12-foot ceilings. But it wasn't the luxury that kept her awake. It was the memory of 2 broken little boys who had learned that fighting was safer than trusting. She arrived at the estate the next morning with dark circles under her eyes and a thermos of coffee she couldn't afford to buy but needed to function. Mrs. Keller met her at the door with raised eyebrows. "I honestly didn't expect to see you again." "I'm stubborn like that," Maya replied, hanging up her coat. The screaming started before she reached the top of the stairs. But this time, Maya was ready. She'd spent half the night researching childhood trauma online at the library, reading everything she could find about kids who'd lost parents. The articles painted a grim picture, but they also gave her something she hadn't had before: understanding. When she pushed open the bedroom door, she found Ethan throwing blocks at the wall while Eli cowered under a desk. The scene looked familiar, but Maya saw it differently now. This wasn't defiance. This was terror. "Good morning," she said quietly, not moving from the doorway. Ethan spun around, a wooden block raised like a weapon. His face was red with rage and something else Maya recognized all too well: the desperate need to push people away before they could leave on their own. "Get out!" he screamed. "We don't want you here." "I know," Maya said simply. "I wouldn't want me here either if I were you." The honesty seemed to catch him off guard. His arm lowered slightly, though he kept the block clutched in his fist. Maya sat down in the hallway, just outside the room, close enough to help if needed, far enough away to not feel threatening. "You know what I did when I was your age and adults made me mad?" Ethan didn't answer, but she could tell he was listening. "I used to hide in bathroom stalls at school and tear up paper towels, just rip them into tiny pieces until my fingers hurt. Made me feel better for about 5 minutes." "That's stupid," Ethan said, but there was less venom in his voice. "Yeah, it was, but it was better than throwing things at people who were trying to help me." From under the desk, Eli's face appeared. His eyes were wide and curious, though he stayed hidden. "Did adults leave you too?" Eli whispered, so quietly Maya almost missed it. The question hit her like a punch to the chest. These children weren't just grieving their mother. They were terrified that everyone else would disappear as well. "Yes," Maya said honestly. "A lot of them did. My dad left when I was 6. Then I lived with different families who promised they'd take care of me, but they always found reasons to send me somewhere else. So you know, Ethan said, and for the first time, his voice wasn't angry. It was sad. I know. For the next hour, Maya sat in that hallway while the boys slowly crept closer. She told them stories about foster homes where she wasn't allowed to touch anything nice, about feeling invisible in her own life, about learning that being angry was easier than being hurt. She didn't lecture them about their behavior. She didn't promise things would get better. She just sat with them in their pain, the way she'd wished someone had sat with her. By lunchtime, both boys were sitting in the hallway too, still keeping distance but no longer hiding. When Mrs. Keller brought up sandwiches, Eli actually said thank you. I've never seen them this calm, Mrs. Keller whispered to Maya later. They're not calm, Maya corrected. They're exhausted. There's a difference. The real breakthrough came on the third day. Maya was cleaning the boys' bathroom when she heard crying from the bedroom. Not screaming or yelling, but quiet, heartbroken sobbing. She found Eli curled up on his bed, tears streaming down his face while Ethan sat beside him, looking helpless and scared. He had a bad dream, Ethan explained, about Mommy. Maya's training kicked in. Every foster home had rules about physical contact with children. Don't touch unless necessary. Maintain professional boundaries. Protect yourself from accusations. But looking at that little boy drowning in grief, all the rules seemed stupid and cruel. Would it help if I sat with you? Maya asked Eli gently. He nodded, still crying. Maya climbed onto the small bed, careful not to crowd him. Eli immediately curled up against her side, his whole body shaking with sobs. Ethan watched warily for a moment, then slowly scooted closer until he was pressed against Maya's other side. They stayed like that for an hour. Maya didn't try to stop their crying or tell them everything would be okay. She just held them while they grieved, her own heart breaking for the childhood trauma she understood too well. When Edward Hawthorne found them like that, his reaction was swift and brutal. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Maya looked up to see him standing in the doorway, his face twisted with rage and something that looked like panic. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and she could smell alcohol on his breath even from across the room. "The boys were upset," Maya said calmly, not moving. "I was comforting them. Get away from my children, now." The harshness in his voice made both boys flinch. Eli buried his face deeper into Maya's shoulder, while Ethan moved protectively in front of his brother. "Mr. Hawthorne," Maya began, but he cut her off. "I don't care what sob story you told them or what game you're playing. You're the help, not their mother. Don't ever touch my children again." Each word was like a slap. Maya felt the familiar shame rising in her throat. The voice that had followed her through every foster home telling her she was crossing lines she had no right to cross. But then she looked down at Eli, still clinging to her, and at Ethan, who was glaring at his father with pure hatred. "They needed someone," Maya said quietly. "They need discipline, not coddling from the hired help. They need love." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Edward's face went white, then red. "You have no idea what my children need. You've been here 3 days. I've been their father for 5 years. Then act like it." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya knew she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. In 3 days, she'd gotten further with these children than anyone else had in months. But she'd also challenged a man who wasn't used to being challenged by anyone, especially not by someone he saw as beneath him. Edward's voice, when he finally spoke, was deadly quiet. "Pack your things. You're fired." Maya felt the boys tense against her. Eli's grip on her shirt tightened, and Ethan made a small sound of distress. "Please," Ethan said, the first time Maya had heard him say the word. "Don't make her leave. She's already gone." Maya gently extracted herself from the boy's grip, her heart breaking at the looks of betrayal and abandonment in their eyes. She'd done exactly what every other adult in their lives had done. She'd made them care, then disappeared. "I'm sorry," she whispered to them, meaning it more than any apology she'd ever given. As she walked toward the door, Eli's voice stopped her. "Are you leaving because of us? Because we're bad?" Maya turned back, tears she'd been holding back finally spilling over. "No, sweetheart. You're not bad. You're just hurting, and that's not your fault." She looked at Edward, standing rigid in his expensive suit, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Behind all that anger and control was a man drowning in his own grief, pushing away anyone who might see how broken he really was. "They're good boys," Maya said to him. "They just need someone who won't leave." Then she walked out of the Hawthorne mansion, past the crystal chandeliers and marble floors, carrying with her the memory of two little boys who had finally started to trust again, only to have that trust shattered one more time. But Maya Williams wasn't the type to disappear quietly into the night. As she walked through those iron gates for what she thought was the last time, something inside her refused to accept defeat. She'd survived worse than an angry millionaire and two traumatized children. She'd survived being unwanted her entire life. The next morning, Maya did something that surprised even herself. She showed up at the Hawthorne estate at 7 a.m. sharp, just like she had the previous 3 days. Mrs. Keller answered the servant's entrance with a look of pure confusion. "Child, what are you doing here? Mr. Hawthorne fired you yesterday." "I know," Maya said simply, "but I never got my final paycheck, and I left some things in the staff quarters." It was a lie, but it got her through the door. What Maya really couldn't leave behind were two little boys who'd spent their entire lives being abandoned by the adults who were supposed to protect them. The screaming started right on schedule, but this time it was different, louder, more desperate, filled with a grief that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. Maya could hear Ethan's voice rising above the chaos. "She's not coming back. Nobody ever comes back." Mrs. Keller winced. "They've been like this since dawn. Worse than I've ever seen them." Mr. Hawthorne locked himself in his study again. "I think he's been drinking all night." Maya climbed those marble stairs without permission, following the sound of her heart breaking. She found the boys in their bedroom, which looked like a war zone. Furniture overturned, clothes scattered everywhere, crayon marks on the walls that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. Ethan was throwing anything he could get his hands on while screaming at the top of his lungs. Eli sat in the corner, rocking back and forth, completely shut down from the overwhelming chaos around him. "Hey," Maya said softly from the doorway. Both boys froze. Ethan spun around, his face a mixture of hope and rage and disbelief. "You came back," he whispered. "I said I would." "No, you didn't. Daddy said you left because we were bad." Maya felt anger rise in her chest, not at the children, but at the man who would tell grieving kids that love was conditional on their behavior. "I left because your daddy was scared, but I came back because I made you a promise, even if I didn't say it out loud." "What promise?" Eli asked, finally looking up from his corner. "That I wouldn't be another adult who gives up on you." The next few hours tested every ounce of patience Maya had ever possessed. The boys didn't trust her return. They tested her with every destructive behavior they could think of. Ethan tried to cut his own hair with scissors. Eli attempted to flush his shoes down the toilet. They broke a vase that probably cost more than Maya's rent and tracked mud through the pristine hallways. But Maya stayed. When Ethan screamed that he hated her, she sat calmly and said, "That's okay. I hated a lot of people when I was your age too." When Eli tried to run away, she followed him to whatever hiding spot he'd chosen and waited patiently until he was ready to come out. By noon, both boys were exhausted from their own rebellion. Maya found them huddled together on their bedroom floor, looking small and defeated. "Are you going to leave now?" Ethan asked quietly. "No." "What if Daddy fires you again? Then I'll come back tomorrow anyway." "But you need money to live," Eli said with the wisdom of a child who'd heard too many adult conversations about financial stress. Maya knelt down to their level. "You know what I need more than money. I need to know that you two are okay, that you have someone who won't give up on you when things get hard." It was then that Edward Hawthorne appeared in the doorway, and his expression was thunderous. "I told you to leave my property," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I know." Maya stood up but didn't step away from the boys. "But they need me. They need stability, not some woman who thinks she can play savior to children she doesn't understand." "You're right. I don't understand everything about them, but I understand what it feels like to be thrown away every time you become inconvenient." Edward's jaw clenched. "You have no right to judge how I handle my family, and you have no right to tell two grieving children that people leave because they're bad." The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Behind Maya, she could hear the boys holding their breath, waiting to see which adult would win this battle that would determine their fate. "Get out," Edward said. "Now." or I'll call security." Maya looked down at Ethan and Eli, seeing the resignation already settling into their young faces. They'd watched this scene play out with 13 other caregivers. They knew how it ended. But Maya had survived things that would have broken most people. She'd lived in foster homes where she was treated like free labor. She'd aged out of the system with nothing but the clothes on her back and a high school diploma. She'd worked 3 jobs while caring for a sick mother. And she'd learned that sometimes the only way to win was to refuse to play by rules designed to keep you powerless. "No," she said simply. Edward blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no. I'm not leaving." "You're trespassing. I can have you arrested." "Then call the police. Explain to them why you're having a woman arrested for caring about your children when you won't." The color drained from Edward's face. Maya could see she'd hit a nerve, but she wasn't done. Those boys have been through 13 nannies in 6 months. 13 people who walked away when things got difficult. Do you know what that does to a child's ability to trust? Do you know what it feels like to spend your whole life wondering what's wrong with you that makes everyone leave? You don't know anything about our situation. I know that Ethan acts out because he's trying to protect his brother from getting hurt again. I know that Eli shuts down because he's learned that caring too much leads to pain. And I know that you're so terrified of failing them the way you think you failed their mother that you'd rather hire strangers than face your own grief. The silence that followed was deafening. Edward stood frozen, his face cycling through anger, shock, and something that looked dangerously close to recognition. "Daddy," Eli's small voice broke the tension. "Please don't make Maya leave. She's nice to us." "She doesn't yell when we're sad," Ethan added quietly. Edward looked at his sons. Really looked at them, perhaps for the first time in months. Maya could see the exact moment when he noticed how they were standing closer to her than to him, how they watched her with hope instead of fear. "I can't," Edward said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I can't keep watching people walk away from them. It's killing them." "Then stop hiring people who see this as just a job," Maya said softly. "Find someone who sees them as children worth fighting for. And you think that's you?" Maya looked down at Ethan and Eli, at their hopeful faces and their guarded hearts, and felt something settle into place inside her chest, something that felt like purpose. "I think I'm someone who knows what it feels like to be them. And I think that matters more than any degree or certification." Edward stared at her for a long moment, and Maya could see him wrestling with something bigger than just a personnel decision. He was deciding whether to trust someone who had already proven she wouldn't abandon his children, or to keep cycling through professionals who saw the boys as problems to be managed rather than people to be loved. "1 month, he said finally. "You get 1 month to prove this isn't just some misguided rescue fantasy, but there will be rules, boundaries. You're not their mother." Maya nodded, understanding the weight of what he was offering. "I don't want to replace their mother. I just want to help them heal." As Edward walked away, Maya heard him mutter something under his breath that sounded like, "God help us all." But Maya wasn't worried about divine intervention. She was counting on something much more reliable, the stubborn determination of a woman who had finally found children worth fighting for, and the healing power of refusing to give up on people who had given up on themselves. The real work was just beginning, and Maya Williams had never been more ready for a fight in her life. The first month at the Hawthorne estate passed like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Every day brought new challenges that tested Maya's resolve in ways she never imagined. But slowly, impossibly, something began to shift. It started with the smallest things. Ethan stopped throwing his breakfast across the room when Maya sat down to eat with him, instead of hovering over him like a prison guard. Eli began speaking in whispers instead of complete silence when Maya asked him questions about his drawings, rather than demanding he explain his behavior. But Edward Hawthorne remained a wall of skepticism and barely contained hostility. He watched Maya's every interaction with his children like a hawk circling prey, waiting for her to prove that she was just another temporary fix in a long line of failures. The breaking point came 3 weeks into Maya's trial period, on a Tuesday that started like any other, but ended with everyone's lives forever changed. Maya was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard the crash. Not the usual sound of toys being thrown or furniture being knocked over, but something different, something that made her blood run cold. She raced upstairs to find Eli at the bottom of the grand staircase. his small body crumpled and motionless. Ethan knelt beside his brother, screaming his name over and over, tears streaming down his face. What happened? Maya dropped to her knees beside Eli, her hands shaking as she checked for signs of consciousness. "He was running," Ethan sobbed. "He said he could fly like the birds in his book. He jumped and then he fell, and then he wouldn't wake up." Maya's training from her first aid certification kicked in. She checked Eli's pulse, steady but weak. His breathing was shallow but regular. A large bruise was already forming on his forehead, and his left arm was bent at an unnatural angle. "Mrs. Keller," Maya shouted. "Call 911, now!" The next few minutes blurred together in a haze of paramedics, sirens, and Edward Hawthorne's face going white as paper when he arrived home to find his son being loaded into an ambulance. At the hospital, Maya sat in the waiting room with Ethan clinging to her like a lifeline, while Edward paced the hallway, alternating between furious phone calls to doctors and moments of staring blankly at the wall. "Is Eli going to die like Mommy?" Ethan whispered against Maya's shoulder. The question cut through her like a knife. "No, sweetheart. Eli is hurt, but the doctors are going to fix him up. He's going to be okay." "How do you know?" Maya looked at this little boy who had already lost so much, who was now facing the possibility of losing the only constant left in his world, and felt her heart break all over again. Because sometimes we have to believe things will be okay, even when we're scared. That's what hope is. 3 hours later, a doctor emerged with news that Eli had a concussion and a broken arm, but no permanent damage. He would need to stay overnight for observation, but he was going to make a full recovery. The relief in the waiting room was palpable. Edward sank into a chair like a man who had been holding his breath for hours. Ethan finally stopped crying long enough to ask if he could see his brother, but as they walked toward Eli's room, Edward grabbed Maya's arm. "This is your fault," he said, his voice low and filled with venom. "You were supposed to be watching them. You were supposed to keep them safe." Maya felt the familiar shame rising in her throat, the voice that had followed her through every failure telling her that she wasn't good enough, that she'd let down the people who needed her most. But then she looked at Ethan, who was watching this exchange with wide, fearful eyes, and something inside her snapped. "You're right," Maya said quietly. "I should have been watching more carefully. I should have anticipated that a 5-year-old might try to fly off the stairs. But you know what else I should have done? I should have been the parent who knew his child well enough to recognize the signs that he was planning something dangerous." Edward's grip on her arm tightened. "How dare you?" "How dare I what? Point out that you've spent so much time hiding from your children that you don't even know them anymore? Eli has been talking about flying for weeks. He's been drawing pictures of birds, asking questions about how they stay in the air, testing out jumping from progressively higher surfaces. Any parent who was actually present would have seen this coming." The accusation hung in the sterile hospital air like a toxic cloud. Edward released her arm as if she'd burned him. "I'm grieving too," he said, and for the first time since Maya had met him, his voice broke. "I lost my wife. I'm trying to hold together a business, a household, 2 children who hate me, and I'm failing at all of it. So excuse me if I'm not the perfect father you think I should be." Maya stepped closer, her voice softening. "I don't expect you to be perfect. I expect you to be present. Those boys don't need a perfect father. They need their father. The one who's brave enough to sit with them in their pain instead of drowning his own." Edward stared at her, tears finally spilling over. In that sterile hospital hallway, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the smell of antiseptic, 2 broken adults finally saw each other clearly. "I don't know how," he whispered. "Then learn. With me. With them. Together." 6 months later, the Hawthorne mansion buzzed with a different kind of chaos. Ethan's laughter echoed through the halls as he chased Eli, whose cast had become a canvas for colorful drawings. Edward sat on the floor of their playroom, his expensive suit wrinkled, building block towers that the boys delighted in knocking down. Maya Williams had done the impossible, not by taming wild children or impressing a wealthy employer, but by refusing to give up on a family that had forgotten how to love itself. She'd proven that sometimes the most powerful qualification isn't a degree on the wall or years of experience. It's the courage to stay when everyone else walks away. Maya's story reminds us that healing doesn't happen overnight, but it always begins with someone who refuses to let go. Someone who sees potential where others see problems, hope where others see hopelessness.